Rationalization. If you've watched another of my videos called Types of Society, you'll recall that there are different kinds of society and that they often change from one kind to another in this process we refer to as modernization. And there's a video about that as well. Within the modernization process, there are other things going on, one of which is this process of rationalization. So the first thing to understand is that rationalization is a process of change that societies go through. It's the process by which a society becomes more rational. Now, that's sort of obvious, right? We could have figured that out just by understanding the English language. To know what we really mean, let's look at what we mean by rational. And to do this, let's look at its opposite, non-rational. Now, before we go any further, it's important to point out that by non-rational, we do not mean irrational or nonsensical. We're not talking about behaviors that are random or don't seem to make any sense or unpredictable. In both cases, rational and non-rational, we're talking about a philosophical or methodological or strategic approach to problem solving. Every society has to accomplish certain tasks, and there are rational ways and non-rational ways of approaching those tasks, both at the societal or the individual level. So, to start off, in rational ways of thinking, we're talking about calculation. Specifically, we're trying to calculate what is the most efficient way to do something. By contrast, in non-rational approaches, we're more concerned with what is right than with what is efficient. Things like values and morals and traditions are more important than efficiency. We might talk about artistic values or aesthetic values, kind of same thing, or morals, religious values, so on and so forth. There's a phrase you'll often see in economics that comes into other sciences as well, where a person is trying to maximize their own best self-interest. And in fact, there's an entire school of thought within sociology called rational choice theory that tries to understand how this motive, this motivation, influences the social order and behavior. Right? So here, again, we're trying to calculate the most efficient way to maximize our own best self-interest. Non-rational, on the other hand, often focuses on altruism, how to help others, or self-sacrifice, what's best for society. Rational focuses on results. We might say, for example, that the ends justify the means, whereas non-rational focuses on process. It's not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game. Finally, rational ways and approaches tend to be very impersonal, or we might say business-like or professional is kind of a euphemism, whereas non-rational approaches tend to be personal. We associate them with things like our family ties or the loyalty we feel towards our friends. Now, before we go on, it's important to point out that the way that I've presented this makes non-rational seem beautiful and virtuous and good, whereas rational seems manipulative and calculating and sort of cold. It can be that way, and those are important critiques that Max Weber made about society. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's also important to remember that there are traditions and beliefs and values, morals even, that are very negative, that hurt a lot of people. Racism and sexism, for example, are traditions that are damaging to society and to individuals. On the other hand, there are rational ways of calculating things that are very important and have increased the standard of living for millions of people all over the world. Rational farming methods feed more people at a lower cost than some traditional methods do. The last point to remember is that as social scientists, we're not trying to judge one or the other as better or worse. We're simply trying to understand two different ways of accomplishing tasks within a society. Both of these ways, rational and non-rational, can be used to sort of measure a society, where it's at in its progression and where it's going. The idea of rationalization is most associated with one of the founding sociologists, Max Weber. In his view, rationalization is a key aspect of the modernization process. It's both a cause and effect, right? It happens as societies modernize, and it also helps them modernize more quickly. To get an idea of how Weber saw this, we'll kind of imagine a timeline here. Rationalization began in factories with industrialization. People moved into factories, the assembly line was developed, production of goods became more rational and much more efficient, and goods became cheaper. As large companies and other large institutions developed, they developed into bureaucracies, which are rationalized organizations, rationalized systems for accomplishing the work that large institutions do. This affected government and even religions as they changed the way they operate. And what's most interesting here, and most concerning to Weber, was that this rationalization process doesn't stop there. It eventually spills into all aspects of life, making our family and personal lives much more rational than they were traditionally. For example, historically, someone might get married because of family tradition, religious values, so on and so forth. With modern marriages, there's often a legal prenuptial agreement to protect the best self-interests of all the parties involved. Weber was concerned because he felt that rationalization not only affects production, but it also affects moral and social conditions. It affects the way people relate to one another in a society, and it affects the society generally. To end, let's give you kind of a definition. And this was difficult because one of the things that's interesting is that rationalization is often portrayed and discussed very differently, even in different one-on-one textbooks. So I tried to bring all of the different ideas together into one sort of big definition. We'll go through these points, and we've already talked about many of them. First of all, again, rationalization is the process by which society becomes more rational. It's marked by an increased ordering and organizing of life. So a good example of this is the clock. I don't get up or go to work or come home when I feel like it. I follow the organizing principle of time and the clock because it's more rational. Rationalization includes formal rules, regulations, and procedures. There are strict ways that you accomplish each task in your job throughout the day. Your relationship at work is impersonal, it is professional, and for example, you don't like the people you work with, but it's efficient to get along with them. It's the rational thing to do your job well. Again, this idea of economic logic, maximizing profit, is increasingly applied to all aspects of human activity. The goal here is maximizing efficiency, but it often happens without any consideration for subjective or individual concerns. For example, we put a person on an assembly line because it's the most efficient way to make a product, and we don't worry about whether it's boring or mind-numbing or hard on their back to stand there and do one thing all day long. Right? We're focused on efficiency, not comfort or individual development and growth or artistry, for example. Just another way of saying kind of the same thing, methods of precise calculation and organization, time, hours worked, so on and so forth, the number of things produced, come to increasingly dominate the entire social world. Weber refers to this as the iron cage, and there'll be another video about that. But again, the main idea here is that there's this process by which society shifts from being non-rational to more rational. And this starts in industry and production, but according to Weber, it slowly moves out to other aspects of society as the modernization process moves forward. So again, rationalization is a process of change that shapes the way people think about and approach problem solving within their society. Thanks for watching.